Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Kroll, and I'm here to present virtually at Tampa Digital Dealer 21, Programmatic meets Pragmatic. Navigate turbulent times with data insights and cross-platform optimizations. Let's go ahead and get started. This is what we're going to be talking about for the next 50 minutes or so. Obviously, there's a whole lot going on right now with market conditions, so we definitely need to talk about that and talk about how you can make the most of those in these turbulent times. We'll spend some time going over the various programmatic channels and how we look at them here as building blocks to build upon each other to get the best success. Then we'll talk about how to really set up these campaigns and how to fine tune them so that you can get the most horsepower possible out of your marketing mix. And then finally, how are we going to connect all of these ads that we're going to be running to actual sales in your dealership, sales and conversion events in your dealership. And then we'll just recap everything at the end. But without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So first off, obviously, I wish I could have been with you all in person, but we're kind of in a little bit of a perfect storm right now. And part of that perfect storm is predicated upon everything that went wrong over the last 15 months or so with the pandemic. Obviously, we've been in pandemonium. That has caused quite a bit of havoc, multiple different levels, from dealerships not able to be open due to local laws and regulations, or to consumers not wanting to go out and visit dealerships because of the pandemic, to just how it's disrupted daily life for the last 15 months or so. So lots of things that are going on there that have started to sort of precipitate all of what is happening currently, right? So that has made a major change in consumer buying behaviors. Not only are consumers thinking differently about how they're buying cars, they're researching things differently, they're also interacting a whole lot more with media offline before they're even setting foot on the dealership, if they're even setting foot in your dealership to begin with. Then you have consumer media consumption changes. So one of the biggest ones we're going to be talking about today is the change that's happened between basically cable TV and streaming TV, and how cord cutting has really accelerated. And the pandemic has kind of kicked the opportunities with connected TV about 2 years into the future from where it probably would have been had it not happened. Throw all of that into the mix with a privacy push and what's happening in particular. A lot of you, I'm sure, are familiar with what's happening with Apple's iOS 14.5. We'll talk about that and that impact. But then on top of all that, throw in the lovely chip shortage, and we've got a major market influx. So it's really a perfect storm. And while it's presenting pretty tough and turbulent challenges right now, I always try and look for the opportunity in everything. And while there are some challenging times right now, I also think that there's a huge opportunity right now for the dealerships who are smart and the dealerships who are efficient to gain market share and to really come out of this storm ahead. So let's talk first about general car buying changes and the shifts. In 2018, according to this Think with Google stat here, about 1% of all US car buyers bought a car online. So meaning no dealership interaction. 2020, 2 years later, that goes up to 10%. My guess is when the numbers come out for March of 2021, it's gone up another 10%, possibly even higher. I think that that's something that is changed and probably will not be going back. So we have to think about how are consumers buying cars, and the shift in terms of digital complete online buying or touchless buying or not interacting with dealership at all. We know that traditionally before the pandemic, we had the average times that people were going to visit a dealership's lot were decreasing anyway. It used to be 4, 5, 6 times, handful of years ago. It was down to about 2 times a couple of years before the pandemic, and now it's less than that. My guess is that'll drop even fewer too. You might just go once because of most of what will be happening online. We pre-negotiated. We know that the websites, and this is Google stats, seems low to me, but websites visited by the average car shopper is 4.2, with 81% visiting at least 2 websites. My guess, as I said, that's probably pretty low, but I think that we definitely know that there's more research happening. More and more consumers are doing everything they can online before they even step foot in the dealership to minimize potential time there. And then also, we see that 73% of shoppers are pretty comfortable negotiating the purchase, the lease, financing terms, either completely online or some sort of mix of online and offline interaction with dealership staff. But this represents a pretty big shift that we're all going to have to deal with in terms of how people are buying cars, how are consumers interacting with dealerships and our staff. So pretty big changes here, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because once we get beyond that, let's see. Actually, it wouldn't be anything without. There we go. Now it's a real presentation when the screen went advanced. Media consumption changes. So 2020 is going to be remembered as one of the tipping points in TV advertising, if not the tipping point, because that's the year that marketers are now going to be able to reach more households via streaming services than they will through traditional cable TV. If you want to let that sink in for a little bit, it's pretty crazy. TV has been dominant for so long, traditional cable, in how you can reach the marketplace on the biggest screen in the house, and that has now changed. And that's something that's going to be exacerbating and changing a little bit further as we go forward in 2021. So pretty big change there. Another big change, and this might be a little bit more fundamental, is everything that's going on with privacy. So privacy is front and center to consumers. And that's happened because of various state privacy laws. You have CCPA in California, CDPA in Virginia. There's national legislation that's potentially floating out there. Those are all, one aspect of it where, how are people using my data? Then you have what has happened with Apple, and with Apple releasing, their iOS 14, lots of consumer privacy features included there. In 14.5, they released what's called AT&T, or App Tracking Transparency. Any of you who are Apple iPhone users or iOS users on your iPad, etc., you know that once you've downloaded this, you're starting to see prompts in different apps saying, would you like to be tracked? If you're even allowed to be tracked at all. One of the defaults in iOS 14.5 is that tracking is automatically off, and you have to, as a consumer, know to go in to ask apps to allow to track. So there's a lot more tracking happening, a lot more privacy-centric media out there, because Facebook, as a result of Apple's 14.5 push, has definitely been, sort of very public about this is going to impact our ability to deliver personalized ads to you, and that's something that's heavy on the front of mind of consumers. What we don't know is really at this point what the downstream impact of that is going to be on media. They're still pretty early in this game, and the iOS impact, I think, is going to be interesting to see what happens if consumers start opting out of those more personalized ads and start seeing ads for classmates.com all the time or something like that, instead of seeing things that were actually useful and interesting to them. So we'll see what happens there. But then you also have looming on the future. So fast forward sometime to early spring, March, April of 2022, Google has signaled that they are going to be basically disabling third-party cookie usage in Chrome, which is the internet's most popular browser. That's going to have a pretty big impact as well too. So it's an unknown outlook for what's going to be happening there, but there are a lot of different alternative identifiers being floated around. You may have heard of UID 2.0, which is sort of being run by the Trade Desk, and now Oracle is signed on, and a few other people, where it's basically an additional identifier that's going to be used to track to replace a cookie. And Google has their sort of own cohort measurement system. But all of this means that everything that we do, from digital ad targeting, which has been probably one of the most effective means of advertising to hit the auto industry since it started, is everything's going to change. But understanding how to reach and how to influence that right audience, while it's shifting, there is probably going to be some potential for cost increases on certain platforms, but it's also something to be mindful of opportunity, as potentially your competition, who's not quite sure how to navigate this, might make a few missteps, and there's opportunity for us to really get after these audiences in the right way to get what we need, which is more cars sold or more service sold. Speaking of cars sold, obviously that's the elephant in the room, right? So the state of affairs is nuts, to be completely honest. The chip shortage has thrown everything into disarray. I have reports of colleagues who are in the Detroit metro area saying that the OEMs are literally paving fields right now just to put cars on that are waiting for chips so that they can get them out downstream to you guys. So that manufacturer production has really that halt has been a massive impact. I don't need to go over that with you guys, right? You all know. We also know that in addition to that, there's a rental car cliff, because all of the rental car companies, when people stopped traveling because of the pandemic, all the business travel stopped. Rental car companies needed to make some money, so they sold off a lot of their inventory. As they sold off the inventory, now you don't have as many rental cars out there. Rental cars are actually going out and trying to buy used cars, as I'm sure you know, to increase their fleet so that they can make more money. That has really sort of helped push the demand for cars even higher, because in addition to the rental cars doing this, rental car companies doing this, now you have all of the consumers doing this as well too. We're seeing a massive migration shift in possibly unprecedented, where you have people leaving cities and population centers where they didn't need cars, people leaving like the San Francisco metro area, New York metro area, et cetera, where people relied on public transportation all the time, or they simply just walked. And now you have people also uncomfortable with ride shares. People want increased freedom. Nobody wants to jump on transit. People were less reliant a few months ago on taking airline travel, and there were less options there. So all of these things increase the demand for cars, where if you wanted to take a vacation, you need a car. So you have this used car shortage as well. There's no rental car supply. People are keeping their cars. That has made for an extreme seller's market for dealerships, and that's great. Profitability per car is really high right now, but that limited inventory is definitely a challenge, because how do you keep growing when you've got all of the demand and not the supply? So there are ways to really use what we're about to talk about with programmatic to help solve for these problems. And I think you guys are going to be interested to understand what it is that can be done to really help this. And what we're going to show you is how to win your share now, right? So we are in the perfect storm at the moment, but we won't be in the perfect storm forever. There will be smoother sailing ahead. And so we want to position ourselves for the future, and we want to use all the tools that are available to acquire. Right now, things you can do to win are use these tools to acquire as much used car inventory as possible. So find sellers before others do, give them strong reasons to buy from you, promote how it's going to be as flawless or seamless a process as you can make it be. You can also look at increasing fixed ops. So what can you do to win your service business? How do you look at building up that database, or better yet, mining that database, going back as far as possible, so that you are messaging folks to come in and keep those cars that are now a gold mine literally sitting on their driveway, to keep it running, because the consumers are aware of this as well too. It's starting to hit the news. So all of these things, if done effectively, while there may not necessarily be a ton of new car availability out there, a lot of new inventory out there, all of these things can be done if done smartly and efficiently. Things that can help position you to grab an increased market share when things do get back to normal. But it's all predicated on doing it efficiently. It's all predicated on doing it smartly, and doing it those two ways will help enhance your margins downstream as well too, once we start getting back to normal. So now we're going to shift out of sort of the outcomes we want into how are we going to do this. And before I get into the actual tactics, I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about the different building blocks and the foundations for success that we consider programmatic. So programmatic as a general definition, and probably the most accepted definition, is it's mechanized ad buying. And you're taking the human out of it. You are setting a series of rules they're using to bid on audiences and deliver ads to those audiences. But there are two different sort of main ecosystems where you can really exercise programmatic buying. The first is what you have on the left. So these are what we call like our walled gardens, right? So this would be search platforms, social media companies. They're a walled garden because they're keeping all of the data inside. They don't want to let the data get out. And it's really, they can sort of consider like that's their audience, right? Outside of that, then you have the open internet. This would be anything outside of social or search, where you have traditional programmatic, whether that's just standard banner ads on websites, etc. It's just the open internet, which is where a vast majority of consumers spend the vast majority of their time anyway, which is why we think it's important. That's why we want to focus here. Lots of opportunities. So that said, how does programmatic really work? I wanted to kind of take you guys behind the mechanisms of how this omnipresent auction house is always happening, and that's basically exactly what it is. So on the left-hand side, what you have is what's called the demand side. And you may have heard of your agency or sales reps talk about DSPs, shown right here. Those are called demand side platforms. Those facilitate the programmatic buys on the demand side, and that's on the behalf of advertisers. On the right-hand side, you have the supply side. And SSPs stand for supply side platforms. That's where all of the money is, or sorry, all the inventory is coming from. So that's where you have all the different publishers who are setting up the ad calls on their site so that when somebody goes to CNN.com or FoxNews.com or ESPN.com and an impression is open, it's now eligible to enter the exchange. On the other side, we have all of the buyers there who are looking for these impressions, and they're looking for those impressions based on data. And so underlying the entire system, you have data at every step of the process, and that's coming from either data providers. So it could be third-party data. So you could be looking at like Polk data or Experian data or you name it, standard demographic data. You could have first-party data. So you could have, say, your pixels on your website. You could have second-party data. Possibly you have relationships with your OEM where you are potentially buying in to target people who are on their website, not just referrals. That would be like a second-party relationship. But essentially, all of these things are happening, and the more data that is present in the ad call, typically the higher the price, because the ad buyers are able to get much more precise on exactly who they are dropping that impression on. Beyond all of that, you also have things like the context of the site. You have the geography of where the impression is being served at the zip code level, or possibly even beyond that at like a geofence level. You have the time of day. You have the operating system that somebody is using. Very important now, especially with everything that's happening with iOS. I'll get more of that later. But all of these factors go into the buy, and essentially what's happening is it's a second price auction. So all of the bidders are coming out bidding on the inventory. On the right, you have the inventory. You don't typically pay what your first bid is, but you pay 1 cent higher than the next highest bidder. And I think a lot of us are familiar with that in terms of that's how Google's second price auction typically works on search. That's getting a little bit more complicated now because a lot of supply side vendors are offering up what's called first price auctions. So it's basically you pay what you bid. It makes it a little challenging, but there are solutions for that, which I will key you in on a little bit later in the presentation. So that said, this is omnipresent. It's going on all the time, basically around us. It happens anywhere from 12 to 15 million times per second. So in the time I've been explaining this, that's however many hundreds of millions or billions of ad calls have happened so far since we've been doing this presentation. It's a lot. And it's been happening this way for a while. So the programmatic inventory, the programmatic system essentially has been going on for several years now, over a decade. It's nothing new, but it's still growing, and it's growing even more rapidly. So what you see here on this chart from eMarketer is 2019, 2020, up to 2022. The blue line represents the share of media display display ad spending that is transacted programmatically. You can see it goes from about 84% here in 2019 up to almost 90% here in 2022 from a projection. That's not that big of a change. The biggest change is how much spend is going on, and that's because of largely what's happening with connected TV. Ton of TV inventory is flooding the market, and that's really driving the push, because while it's always sort of been transacted that way, there's more of it out there, and it's something that all of the networks, which have been sort of pretty hesitant to let their basically their cash cow be transacted programmatically and get away from upfronts. Now it's all about programmatic, and they're not realizing how much money they can make there too, because the consumer shift has already happened. So from a programmatic standpoint, when we're talking about the open internet, and we're not talking about the walled gardens of search and social, there are 5 main ad units, or sort of channels, I would say, that we're going to talk about. That would be display. We're going to talk about native. We're going to talk about streaming audio. We're going to talk about pre-roll video, digital video, and then we're going to talk about connected TV, or CTV, or as you may have also heard it called, OTT. So display is the original Powerhouse. It was the original media. It's been around for, I think it just turned 26, 27 years old, something like that. But it's still out there and it's still incredibly powerful, right? So we chose this purple generator backdrop for a reason. There's tons of different display ads out there. And when I'm talking about display, I am not talking about like pop-up banner ads that just show up in the middle of your screen or anything like that. I'm talking about the embedded graphical banner ads that are either going to be static or there'll be some sort of like an animated GIF or slight motion. Used to be Flash, can't really do that anymore. It's all HTML5 now. But they are still the powerhouse, and they are still the powerhouse because they allow you to do affordable brand building. They are still able to power conversions, and we're able to see a lot of conversions display. They have massive scale, massive scale on the open internet because of how much time people are spending online. And probably the biggest power that you can get, I personally am a huge fan of prospecting with display, but one of the biggest powers that you can get with display is in remarketing, and what you can do there with display. But it's still around, it's still a powerhouse. I would say ignore display ads at your own peril. And I will also get into sort of the conversion aspect of this later, but you also have to look at the view-through aspect of display, and don't just look at what you're seeing in Google Analytics. You have to look to see what's happening in the ad platforms themselves, because that's where the real power lies if you want to unlock how to get as many conversions as possible. Outside of display, sort of next sort of in line in the hierarchy here would be native advertising. And native ads, think of this as sort of like the chameleon of digital advertising, right? So what you're doing here with native ads is you're sort of dynamically matching the look and feel of a website with an ad that would typically be sponsored content. And here's an example of kind of what that looks like here. Hopefully you can see it's a little small, but you'll notice you see some sponsored content here. But with native ads, you're going to get a picture. You'll get typically sometimes a logo. It'll say who is sponsoring the ad and a small description. So it's kind of like a social ad, but to a consumer, it's an extension of content. It's seamless. It's something that generally is built on the fly. So you enter in with those different components of the ad, the image, the title, etc., and the platforms will assemble these based on the type of site. So you don't have to worry about that. So it's really nice, and it kind of fits the form and function of the environment in which it lives, much like a chameleon here. Also, and this is a chart, I believe, from the IAB, is one of the more appealing forms of online advertising from a consumer perspective, because if this is hard to read, this on the right-hand side, the farther you get out, you get the least intrusive. And if you're on the left-hand side, you are the most annoying. And going up this axis here, you are the most interesting versus the least appealing. So native is typically viewed as one of the least intrusive and more interesting versions of ads. Banner ads are sometimes in consumers' minds, they're definitely not intrusive, but they're sometimes not as interesting or appealing. But I think this depends on how you do it. Video ads are going to be a little bit more interesting, but potentially less appealing. A little bit more intrusive. But then you get all pop-ups down here, everybody's least favorite ad. But because of the way that native works and its form and its function, it's typically getting 20 to 60% higher engagement rate than traditional banners. And that's a really good thing, especially if you're able to link your native to content that is going to help describe why someone should click on it. And that might be something about like why someone should sell their used car to you. Then we get into pre-roll or mid-roll. And pre-roll is basically video banner ads. I'm sure you're familiar with them. If you are going on the open internet to any website that's going to have video content, you could be going to a news website. It could be a sports website. It could be a cooking or recipe site, or a site that offers, like how-to videos. If that site is hosting its own video and it's not jumping out or linking to YouTube or something like that, then you have the ability to drop pre-roll ads on top of those videos. Now, typically, you're not going to do it video by video, so it's not going to be necessarily contextual, but it's going to be more of a behavioral targeted or a user targeted based on some sort of data. But the beauty of pre-roll is you are getting past the banner now, and we are combining sight, sound, and motion to elicit an emotional response. And that could be the feeling of having an immaculate service experience. It could be the feeling of, you know what, I can sell my car and this is what it's going to be worth and this is the process it's going to be like. There's lots of things that can be done from an emotional standpoint to get what you want out of your target consumer, and it can be done very cost effectively. There are multiple different lengths you can do with pre-roll. So you can have 15-second videos or you can have 30-second videos. We find that the shorter videos typically work better for maintaining brand recognition. And most of these are going to be auto start. Some of them can be skippable formats. Some of them are non-skippable formats. You want to make sure when you're talking to your agency that you're not buying pre-roll that's masquerading as like in-banner video. You want it to be as like actual, like a good player size. But there's some awesome stuff that can be done with pre-roll ads that I'll get into in a little bit, and also with connected TV ads or any video ad, where you can sequence the ads so you can really tell a story to your target audience, and it's all brand safe environments. So there's really nothing not to like about pre-roll. You get a massive amount of reach. It's really engaging. It resonates if you do it well with the right consumer audience, and you can custom tailor that to those audiences. As I mentioned, from a placement perspective, you really want to look at pre-roll, mid-roll. Don't really want to mess around with post-roll, because at that point, somebody's already watched what they came to watch, and they're probably not going to pay attention. So you definitely want to avoid that. And just like with display, massive power in retargeting with pre-roll, because you can really drop exactly the right message you want to tell somebody who's just been on your website, exactly why they should do business with you, regardless of what that business is, whether it's service, parts, etc. Beyond pre-roll and all the other forms, you also have programmatic audio, and this would be done through things like Pandora or Spotify or iHeart, or it also could be internet radio. But essentially, it's folks who are listening, and instead of thinking about traditional radio, you're now we're able to dynamically drop in ads based on data. So this is something that's grown quite a bit too. You can see that the listeners on the chart over here on the right haven't grown a ton, but the spending has started to pick up because, again, like with connected TV, marketers are starting to follow where the consumers have already been. So they realize there's an opportunity. They know that there's a lot of listening going on. Great opportunity to put those messages in front of folks and get the right responses that we want. So we like pre-roll because it's something that can be connected, not just to your device, but to Bluetooth speakers. So it acts now as, like, generally you could be in the car, you could have it streaming through your home audio system, whatever it might be. Sometimes you get banner ads, companion banner ads with it, but these are generally non-skippable ads. So it promotes active listening and passive action. It's something where you can sort of, you're able to drop the right message in front of folks while they're thinking about potentially, who knows what it is they're doing, but it's a way to sort of drop that message in and drop that impression and get somebody thinking about your dealership. And it's also something that's still in its infancy. It's still growing. There's more inventory being added and more chances to transact programmatically. So still something to look out for the future. But a lot of you, I'm sure, are very interested, and a lot of you are probably already doing connected TV, because that, I would say, is the future, where you're able to pull digital precision, but you're able to get the impact of the largest screen in the house with what you can do with the targeting on connected TV. And connected TV, I think a lot of times people think it's something different. It's not really different. It's real TV. It's the same thing you would normally watch. You just changed your provider. So instead of me going through whether, I'm not going to name any names, but whoever your digital provider was where you had a subscription originally, I have now cut the cord. Now it's streaming. It's, instead of coming in through the cable, it's coming in through my household broadband or Wi-Fi. And now, because of that streaming, we can dynamically insert ads to drop them in front of the consumers, exactly who we want, and we can get right in front of the exact potential buyer. And they don't know any different how those ads are targeted, but they're going to see different ads than their next door neighbors if they're watching the exact same thing. If both people are streaming, you both be watching local news or both be watching a local sports team or something like that. But you'll see different ads based on the household, based on the data that we're going to target. And I mentioned this earlier, it's sort of a watershed moment here, right? Where cable subscriptions have fallen below 80 million for the first time in recent memory. At the same time, supply side households have nearly doubled in the last year. So think about that for a minute. Almost doubled because of the pandemic, because of people cutting the cord. I think I mentioned this earlier, but essentially CTV adoption has been kicked about 2 years into the future. And now everybody's from the consumer side, and now everybody's scrambling to catch up on the marketing side. But why we love CTV is You have the traditional impact of a TV, but you have the exact precision you want from a digital perspective. It's the exact same thing as watching TV, so it's the same production quality, same authenticity comes through, but it's on live events, right? So nothing is changing. It's TV, it's just transacted differently, and it allows for some dealerships who maybe would have had to have buy a very expensive cable zone or potentially broadcast zone if you don't want to. Now, instead of doing that, I'm dropping exactly the right message I want on exactly the right household I want. Or if I'm not targeting at the household level, I'm targeting at the individual device level. I can drop exactly the right message on exactly the right person I want, the right device I want, if we want to target that way. And it's still in its infancy. It's still growing a ton. It's going to keep going this way. I think by the time we get to Las Vegas and Digital Dealer, we'll see what the stats are then. But I think it's going to keep climbing pretty significantly because there's really any going back here. All right, so getting into the really fun part of the presentation is how do we fine tune these programmatic campaigns to get the most out of them so that you can get the maximum benefit for your marketing dollars, okay? So I've been doing this for a long time, and the way that I always sort of like coach a conversation in how do you set up a campaign is you really kind of distill it down to 3 questions, and that is, who do you want to reach? What do you want to tell those people? And then what do you want those people to do, right? So in this instance, let's say that you want to reach a busy mom with kids. You want to tell her that the service appointment is going to be just super smooth and you need to book it today so that you get your spot because you know that, hey, you want that car to keep running. Nobody wants to be stuck without a car right now because of the inventory shortages. So when we work back there from that, right? So we kind of know who we want. Now we think about, all right, what are the different data sources that we can combine here to build the right audience targeting? And this is typically how the agencies will do it. And they'll be looking at, or hopefully this is what your agency is doing it, we'll be looking at multiple different aspects of the data. So like what's out there. So if we want to have the mom with the kids, right? You can look at ingesting CRM data. So you've got your service data. Depending on how much data you have in your CRM and the attention to the detail of the folks who are entering that data, you might have a lot of that data already. So you can bring that data, you can port it into various demand-side platforms of DSPs through what are called like safe harbors, like LiveRamp, or you may have heard of that, but they're basically data onboarding services where your data is brought in, attached, and it's sent to the DSP. Now you can target those folks online. If you do a great job at segmenting, you can start segmenting your data based on any number of facets. So whether that's lifetime value, if you know that people have purchased lots of cars from you, you could look at overall, like, expense or potentially like type of car that's being purchased, whether they're used car buyers, whether they are looking at, SUVs or hybrids, et cetera, or what they've purchased in the past. You can bring all that in. And then you can use that data in 3 different ways. One, you can target those folks. So you can target them with service messages. You could target them with potentially parts messages. You could also use that data in a second way, which would be all of the DSPs, or a lot of the DSPs, have really powerful lookalike modeling or predictive modeling pieces. So we give them all of this great rich data here, put it in and ingest it into the system. Then those platforms are able to find other users that have similar data profiles as what we just uploaded. And now you can target people who look similar to your audience and reach out to them, because we may think, hey, maybe these are folks, and this may be more for a new or used than service potentially, but we know that birds of a feather kind of flock together. If we can get those people identified and serve ads to them, we can generally get some pretty solid performance out of our lookalike and predictive modeling. You can also use that data to suppress. So the third action will be, you know what, I'm already reaching these folks. I've got them with email campaigns. I've got my BDC calling them, whatever it may be. I don't need to go ahead and spend valuable media against them. I want to suppress them, but I want to do everything else, right? I want to do the lookalikes on that. So that's what you can do with first-party data from an offline data onboarding perspective. You can do the exact same thing, but with pixel data. So if you have people who consumer behavior on your site, that's basically, think about that as remarketing. That's your first-party data right there. These are folks who maybe they hit a service schedule appointment page. They never scheduled an appointment. Now you can remarket to them with various messages telling them why, right? So depending on where they fit in that audience. And we already talked about the lookalike aspect of that. But then the other part, you can now fill in with third-party data. And third-party data is, think about that as like your behavioral targeting. So this is coming from other sources that you don't own, but you're basically buying it through your agency. And that could be Polk data, it could be urban science data, it could be data from any credit card company or whatever it might be. But it can be also contextual or keyword targeting data, search terms that folks have used. You can do in-market audiences, so used on Polk or OEM data. It could be purely demographic. I just want to reach women ages 25 to 44 with young children in the home. It can definitely be geo or location-based audiences. One tip here is that, like, let's say you really want to reach out to DoorDash or Instacart drivers for service business, then you can target people whose devices are constantly pinging at grocery stores or restaurants, and know that, you know, hey, most likely this is a delivery driver and they're probably just burning tons of miles on their cars right now. Make sure you're getting in front of them with a service message to have them come get your car serviced from you. You can also do audience exclusion with this third-party data. So you can say, I want to use OEM data to say these are people through Polk or Urban Science who have purchased my new brand just recently, whatever brand you are. I don't want to reach them anymore. I want to suppress them so that I can make sure that I'm reaching folks who are more likely to buy. So depending on, you know, how large you're trying to reach of an area or what your budget is, we're trying to do, we generally say start with 4 or 5 of these different tactics on the prospecting side, and then implement a really robust remarketing strategy to kind of play cleanup hitter there and re-engage those site visitors. And over time, we're going to learn and we're going to continually evolve these campaigns to get the maximum effect. And some of these examples of the data I mentioned, you can get as granular as you want down to make and model. You can look at potentially used make and model that people are looking at. You can look at very specific from like a parts perspective, folks who are in market for tires, different brands, all that is out there. It's amazing. There's 90 to several 100,000 different data segments from all the different data providers that are there. And you don't have to just target one. You want to try and layer all these together, and then you can learn, which I'll talk about in a little bit, what's actually working and prune the rest out. So beyond that, now let's talk about sort of like how you can anticipate consumer situations. There's data that will come in that show, hey, people who are currently in leases, they're going to be ending in 3, 6, or 9 months. You kind of want to start talking to those folks sooner than later now, because 3 months might be too late. They may have already made up their mind. But you can either get this from a conquest perspective of either trying to get people to come away from other brands, or you can look at this as a reassurance or insurance perspective of like, you want to make sure you come back to us and talk to us first. You could look at the age of the vehicle owned, whether it's 0 to 5 years or 6 to 10 years or 16 plus years, which would be like my commuter car that's sitting in the driveway right now, the airport car. Lots of that data is out there. You can look at current weather conditions. So, if you wanted to advertise, let's say like all season radials or something like that, and all of a sudden it's raining, that would be a good ad to throw out there. Anything is possible. It really just comes down to who do you want to reach, what do you want to tell them, and what do you want them to do? And then you can build these campaigns very effectively to get the most benefit. Huge pro tip here is that you want to talk to your agency and make sure that you are avoiding as fraud as diligently as possible, and you're maximizing viewability, because while this is not necessarily something you have to worry about as much on the connected TV side of things, this is really more for display and native. There is quite a bit of non-human traffic out there. And the best DSPs are going to have partnerships, either whether with Double Verify or in this case, you see on this Human, which is formerly known as White Ops, where remember we're talking about like the supply and the demand side. The supply side is being filtered out pre-bid. So before we're even bidding on it, we're filtering out bots and we're filtering out non-human traffic so that your ads are not being wasted on R2D2 who is not going to buy a car, right? So that cost is generally something that's passed on to the supply side platform. So there shouldn't be an extra cost for you. Double Verify or something like that. If it's like an add-on, maybe that would be there. But then we know that we're serving up viewable ads. We're serving up fraud-free to human traffic. Huge pro tip. Make sure you have that discussion with your agency. And if the costs aren't being passed on to you, make sure you talk to them about that. Another pro tip is I mentioned earlier about the way that ads are transacted now, right? So it's not so much a second price auction. You have the first price auction. A lot of the platforms have some great AI that can work on what's called a predictive clearing price. By looking at all of the past bids and transactions, we can look to see, all right, for this inventory, for this data, what should we be paying? Because we don't want to put out a bid of 550 if a bid of 325 is going to work. That means I can double my impressions. So using state-of-the-art AI that's out there to get the best possible return is huge. And it's tricky. Some DSPs are also SSPs. I would talk to your agency about that and make sure that the DSP you're using is representing the demand side, so that you know there's no conflict of interest there, that they aren't bidding to help possibly inflate their supply. So just something to be cognizant of. This is one of my favorite slides. So when we think about what can be done to really fine tune, when we're talking about anything that would be streaming, and so that would be a digital video, digital audio, or connected TV, you can do sequential messaging. So this is an example for video or CTV, either one's kind of interchangeable here. But you would basically say, let's say I have my main audience here, right? So I know who I want to reach, what I want to tell them, what I want to do, right? Let's say it's a safety message. And this is probably more of like an OEM example, but you can do the same thing at your dealership, where message number one is, hey, we're here, we're educating you, we're telling you about why we're here, why you should buy from us. Message number two would only be shown to people who watch 100% of message number one. Same thing for message number three, only gets shown to 100% of people who watch message number two all the way through, watch 100%, I should say. And then you can do this down the line. It depends on how much content you have, how much creative you have. But let's say you're now stitching together 15-second videos. You can stitch together in a 15-second ad. It's kind of hard to tell a story. Now you can stitch 3, 4, 5, 6 of these together and tell an awesome story over time, separated out by recency, so it's not every single commercial, but it's basically like a spaced out infomercial to people that's telling them what you want to tell them in the order you want to tell them to get the response that you really want. And if over time, if folks aren't still making it to your website or they haven't converted, maybe you stop on the video side because it's going to be probably 2 to 3 times as expensive as what you would get on traditional display. And now you start retargeting those folks with more cost-effective retargeting. Change it up, show them different messages, test different messages, and see what kind of response you get. And if they still don't respond, cut them, because they may not actually be in market after all. But it's a great thing you can do across all those platforms. Beyond the targeting, tons of optimizations out there, right? I'm not going to bother reading this bubble word soup here, but just about anything you want to optimize towards can be optimized towards. And the question would be, are humans doing this, or is this done through some sort of machine learning or AI? Most of the platforms out there on the programmatic side are doing this through machine learning or AI, and you basically can set a target and the platforms will start to be able to auto-optimize to a degree based on what you're trying to get you the lowest CPA possible for the conversions you're optimizing towards in the platform. One thing that is not so much AI is something that can be done on what's called recency optimization. So a bid modifier, think about this as something like enhanced CPC for search, right? Where you want to pay a little bit more for a certain keyword based on certain conditions. We know that the propensity to convert generally declines over time as somebody from the initial visit. So why pay the same, right? So if you're paying a static flat CPM rate of $6, let's say, and this is just for, let's say it's the display or native, right? And this is just demonstration purposes only. If you know that the propensity is to decline on a remarketing audience is going to go down over time, why pay the same amount? You shouldn't have to. You want to make sure you really get in front of that audience to start. And then when you get down here past, when they're less likely to convert, you can still get after them, but instead of paying 100% on the dollar, pay 50% on the dollar, right? So that's something that can really help, and you can cap that frequency over time too. You can do the same thing with frequency. We know that frequency, typically the first few ads are going to be the most valuable. That's also combining with recency, something where, you don't want people to go out and, already make a decision. So you want to make sure you're getting those audiences when they're in market. So pay more for those first ones, but then as it drips down, go ahead and pay less, right? So this is something that's a really great tactic that can be used to maximize efficiency in your campaigns. And on the frequency side, this is something particularly for CTV, but some studies have shown that excessive frequency actually hurts. So if somebody's seen an ad once, 5.7 times more likely to make a purchase than those who haven't seen the ad. obviously you have to see an ad to have it purchase that thing in the ad, otherwise it's totally coincidental. If you show an ad 2 to 5 times, you go up an additional 4.4%. So now you're 10% more likely than people who haven't seen the ad. As you go beyond 6 and 10 ads per day per user, now you're starting to see that frequency decrease. And so you're back down to just 1 ad. So why pay more when 1 will generally get it done? You can also do bid modification with day parts. And so think about this. If you know that most of your service appointments are booked on certain times of day, certain days of the week, map through that data, figure out when that is, and that's when you want to be fishing, right? So you fish when the fish are biting. This is what you're going to want to do. You're basically adjusting your bids so that you are out there when your consumers are out there, and you're, think of this as like wallpapering the internet to make sure that you're there. Or to use a surfing analogy, if the wave's coming in like this, you don't want to be in front of the wave, you're going to get crushed. You don't want to be on the back side of the wave. You really want to surf that wave and make sure you're there so that you're putting the exact right messages in front of those folks at the times when they're going to do the most impact. Dynamically done too, use the tools that are available for dynamic remarketing. Probably don't need to spend a whole lot of time on this, but you know that you can follow people around with the cars that they're looking at. What you don't know is you can probably also change your bids on that based on their propensity to purchase. And depending on what someone's doing, you might bid more or less based on their activity that's happening on site. And once somebody has, let's say filled out a contact us form, you can then also decide, you know what, I can try and bid even higher on these folks to sell them on the power of my dealership and why they should take my quote, call my BDC, get in contact or whatever, or I could stop serving them ads because they've already converted and now I want to, move that budget onto somebody else. So again, they're all awesome channels, but when done the right way, they can also be remarketed across these different channels. So as I mentioned, the sequential messaging, you can target people who have seen various ads with CTV and shown different ads. You can also target people who have been exposed to CTV ads with any of these other ads, or pre-roll ads with display or audio or native or CTV. So if somebody has watched those messages and, like let's say you want to immediately follow up with, maybe you have a sort of like more of a branding message on CTV, and then you want to follow up with a tactical ad and target the devices connected to that household IP, like mobile devices with a click here to schedule your service, slots available right now, or something like that. You can do that, and that's a way to sort of like further reinforce the effectiveness of their campaigns. And to consumer, it just looks like it's crazy coincidence, but we know we're being really smart and efficient in getting those right ads in front of these folks to get the right response that we want. All right, home stretch here, folks. How do we connect all these ads to sales, and how do we learn from these results? Well, there's tons of measurements coming through, right? So I mentioned some of those earlier. The DSPs have, this is just the one that we use, but 87 different reporting measures on 106 different reporting grains. That's enough for the average person to just blow their mind. So that's why you have to use machine learning or AI to determine what's there. But you'll see CPM, you'll see the average bid. You can dig into the geos that are working. You can look at the reach and frequency to find and dial into the right cap of what's there. Audience insights is one of my favorite, right? So let's say we're doing a lookalike model on something on your site. We can dig into that and figure out these are the right folks who are actually working, and this is what's driving the right amount of return. These are the audiences. But connecting all these dots, you have to look at it not just from a click through, but from a view through attribution perspective, and then that's how you can start really fine tuning what you're doing from an online KPI perspective. But you can also do it for an offline KPI perspective. And so using things like with mobile partnerships with people who are leveraging movement data from apps. Our phones are always on. The GPS is generally pinging from your maps 200 times a day. If somebody's exposed to any of the ads that I just talked about, and then they wander into this precise polygon of your dealership, your showroom floor, or potentially your lot, we can ping that message back to say, ad was served to this person, person is here, counted as a conversion. Or you can do the same thing with totally turnkey through Urban Science with a direct integration with some DSPs where they take the OEM data, they match it back to people who have actually purchased cars into the bid stream, and we can see these people were served ads, these ads are working, we paid for this, this is what it got us. Here we can calculate a return on ad spend, and we can generate a marketing cost per car sold. So yes, everything's crazy, and yes, this was a fast 50 minutes, but there is going to be smoother sailing ahead. And these strategies, we think, can help you get ahead of what's going to be coming and help you get the best out of your marketing. And programmatic typically has been overlooked, but in the current climate, it's an awesome tool that should be re-examined again because it can get great granularity and insights, because you can do amazing things with optimizations and save dollars. But really connecting everything together, that gives you the confidence to proceed or the insights you need to accurately alter course. And it's just always gonna be a process. But hey, thank you guys so much for spending the time with me. I really appreciate it. My name is Brian Kroll. Once again, there's how to get in contact with me. And I'm really looking forward to getting back out there. And I will see you guys hopefully in Las Vegas in October. But thank you very much. Be well. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.